fine. I'm fine. Here we go. In July 2024, Emerald Fennell of recent Saltburn infamy posted a photo revealing that she was working on a new adaptation of Emily Bronte's 1847 novel, Wuthering Heights. And right away, people had thoughts. In my last video, I briefly discussed my sentiments on Wuthering Heights. I hated Wuthering Heights. So as you'd imagine, I have feelings on this upcoming movie. I have gone on an absolute roller coaster of opinions regarding this adaptation, and I really have been trying to wrap my head around both Wuthering Heights, the novel, as well as this adaptation, and now the other mini adaptations of Wuthering Heights. Because as someone who kind of hates Wuthering Heights, ruined my life, you can bet your ass I'm gonna see this movie. So, because I love to suffer for my art, I reread the book, and watched as many adaptations of Wuthering Heights as I could without having a mental breakdown, and watched and read as many things as I could about Emerald Fennell, her movies, and this upcoming adaptation as I could without being afraid of my own bathroom. Oh, and I watched this new version. Along the way, I started to notice patterns in both the adaptations and my own spiral of thoughts. This whole thing became a puzzle. What is Wuthering Heights trying to say? How do you adapt it to the screen? And why has no one gotten it right yet? Basically, I'm gonna need even more therapy after this. Wuthering Heights has been adapted many, many times. I think the natural progression of thought here is why make another one? There's a public sentiment that Hollywood needs new ideas, but one could also argue that Wuthering Heights has never received a satisfying adaptation. You'd think we'd have something given that we have hundreds of years worth of adaptations that span generations, languages, countries, and genres. There's two major Pride and Prejudice adaptations, and they're both well received and loved by fans. If you ask a Wuthering Heights fan what adaptation to watch, you'll likely get some combination of 4 or 5 different adaptations with a lot of caveats. Wuthering Heights is very complex, and not even in the pretentious, well, you have to analyze this from multiple different angles to get the full picture, only the true media critics can understand. I cannot emphasize this enough. I have never seen this much disagreement and varying perspectives on a novel as I have Wuthering Heights. And I think people's views on both the upcoming Emerald Fennell adaptation and the plethora of adaptations before it captures this well. So, is Wuthering Heights adaptable? There's as much discourse about Wuthering Heights adaptations as there is about Wuthering Heights itself. So you have to ask yourself, are they really doing it that badly? Like, is Emily Bronte actively rolling in her grave as we speak? There are a lot of nuances and thematic elements that mean changing one thing, even minor in an adaptation, can change the entire meaning of the story itself. Which is something I kept thinking as I watched the 2026 adaptation. So join me on what my therapist describes as racing thoughts for Wuthering Heights, the unadaptable novel. Quick caveat about Heathcliff, I'll be discussing him in this video with the assumption that he is not white. I know this gets a lot of pushback, and people say things like, oh, dark meant something else at the time, and while I do understand that, there's a lot of other racially charged language used in this book that hints to him not being white. And because race was defined differently at the time, at the very least, he's not an Englishman. Anyway, here we go. Hey, how's your week been? Terrible. Is it the political and socioeconomic state of the world right now? It's Wuthering Heights. Christ, again? I hate it. Did you read it again? Of course. Why? You haven't recovered from the last time. I know, that's exactly why I need to read it again, okay? I need to figure it out. I need to win. It's a book. It's a menace. What is it this time? There's just too many ways to analyze this book. So, Wuthering Heights follows. Yeah, no. I know, I remember from last time. A man adopts a boy named Heathcliff while traveling. His son, Henley, hates him. His daughter, Catherine, loves him. They grow up to love each other even more, but because of his class, Catherine marries the neighbor Edgar for status over love. Heathcliff is mad. He enacts a multi-generational revenge on her family, his family too. She dies, he dies. It's sad. I mean, you're not wrong, but But there's an essence to the story that's unexplainable. When most people think of Wuthering Heights, they think of the main couple, Catherine and Heathcliff. There is a love story. Some people say things like, "This is a love story," and then people are quick to come in with a, "No, this is a revenge story." I think this simplified example demonstrates the overall problem with Wuthering Heights, and that is figuring out what it is. It's realistic fiction with supernatural elements, religious themes, commentary on gender, commentary on social hierarchy, commentary on race. It shows abuse, codependence, violence, they curse, which was a big deal back then, and it also shows you the worst goddamn people you'll ever read about and tries to make you feel bad for them. Oh, and everyone has the same names. There's elements of incest, both actualized and implied, but both of these confusing additions are actually significant aspects of the commentary. Filmmakers then, for whatever their reason, take these elements and put them to the screen. That's easy enough, right? Like, we've all seen movies with these elements, and some even dare to combine them. But of course, adapting Wuthering Heights isn't that simple. Yeah, you don't say. There is no true answer to what Wuthering Heights is. So, if you have a puzzle with multiple solutions, how can you say what the right one is? When it comes to an adaptation, can you capture this nature, or do you have to choose a solution to the puzzle? And how can you make this satisfying to the large majority of readers and viewers? I think it's possible to make a satisfying adaptation of something. Lord of the Rings, The Shawshank Redemption, Pride and Prejudice, like the list goes on and on. No matter which solution to the puzzle is chosen, this book has a lot of peculiarities that are often overlooked in adaptations, and while I understand why, Bronte writes with explicit intentions, so leaving out any of these aspects makes the story feel lesser to an extent. The narration is a big one. We begin the story from the perspective of a man named Lockwood, who is a tenant at the nearby Thrushcross Grange. He's visiting Wuthering Heights to meet his landlord, Heathcliff. He finds Wuthering Heights decrepit and its inhabitants uncivil. There's mean servants, mean dogs, dead rabbits that were probably also mean, and the mean landlord. Later on, Lockwood spends the night at Wuthering Heights in Catherine's old room where he finds her name scratched into the ledge of the windowsill. Catherine Earnshaw, Catherine Heathcliff, Catherine Linton. His dreams are haunted by the ghost of Catherine who comes crashing through his window. Heathcliff, distraught by Lockwood's story, dismisses Lockwood and goes on to beg for Catherine's return. Lockwood is a device to set up the hook of the story, which is essentially, what the hell is going on? A feeling that does not leave you for the duration of the novel. He returns to his lodging and invites the housekeeper, Nellie Dean, to join him at dinner. In his words, "I desired Mrs. Dean, when she brought in supper, to sit down while I ate it, hoping sincerely she would prove a regular gossip." It is through Nellie talking to Lockwood that this story is told to us. She is our main narrator, but not technically the primary narrator because Lockwood is narrating what Nellie is telling him. Say that one more time. Lockwood is telling us what Nellie is telling him. We have two narrators, two voices to sort through. Okay. Very few adaptations include Lockwood, so Nellie's narration is virtually non existent or shoehorned in. I do get it, in a book, narration, especially this complex style of narration, is much easier to do. This being from the point of view of Nellie also limits the storytelling capabilities because Nellie either has to be present for the events or have the events relayed to her by another character. Again, works in a book but comes off very telling, not showing in a movie. In the book, the entire story is told as neighborhood gossip. We've all had weird neighbors over the years. Oh my god, yeah, remember your neighbors who are vampires? Of course, and like me, I'm sure we've all told stories about those weird neighbors, but imagine making those stories into a movie. They're never going to be told with the same level of personal connection that gossipers have. That goes double for Nellie, who is not just a neighbor but grew up with the main characters. The rest of Lockwood's quote from before is, "I desired Mrs. Dean, when she brought in supper, to sit down while I ate it, hoping sincerely she would prove a regular gossip, and either rouse me to animation or lull me to sleep by her talk." Because gossip can be scandalous or boring as hell. That doesn't quite sell you on an adaptation, but either way, Nellie is a subjective narrator. The entire story and character descriptions are influenced by her opinion, and at times that does make the story really boring. For example, in the second half of the story, we spent a lot more time than I think we needed to with Catherine's daughter, also named Catherine because readability takes a backseat to theme in this book. Nellie nursed and raised Catherine II, and she gives so much time to this girl's trivial sufferings, and honestly, I didn't care, but that's besides the point. Removing or diminishing Nellie's role in the story diminishes the voice Bronte was writing with. This has been a theme for Wuthering Heights criticism since the book was published. Emily Bronte's sister Charlotte edited the 1850 edition of Wuthering Heights and included a preface that is often included at the beginning of the novel to this day. How Charlotte Bronte handled her sister's legacies after their deaths is often criticized, and this preface is a prime example of why. The writer who possesses the creative gift owns something of which he is not always master, something that at times strangely wills and works for itself. He may lay down the rules and devise principles, and to rules and principles it will perhaps for years lie in subjection, and then when it will no longer consent to harrow the valleys or be bound with a band in the furrow. She goes on to say, as for you, the nominal artist, your share in it has been to work passively under dictates you neither delivered nor could question, that would not be uttered at your prayer, nor suppressed nor changed at your caprice. Essentially, Charlotte is saying that her sister, as an artist, was possessed by the wild nature of the moors to write a story that captures it. Emily didn't write it, the spirit of writing willed her to do it. Charlotte biases the reader's perception of the book by asserting what she believes is the right way to read it. It also deflects blame away from Emily to try and soften reactions to the violence and vulgarity in the book. Wuthering Heights was a very shocking book for its era, and it still is. Again, violence, abuse, lions, tigers, and bears, oh my. But its critiques of the social hierarchy, patriarchy, and racism of the era were equally as shocking. I understand Charlotte's intention to protect her sister's legacy, seeing as they were both operating under the rigid gender expectations that Wuthering Heights critiques. The consequence is nearly 2 centuries of readers who read Wuthering Heights having read this verse, myself included when I was in high school. This preface takes away from Emily Bronte's autonomy as a writer and immediately gives the reader the point of view that this book is the channeling of the wild moors and its impact on human nature rather than a nuanced look at society. By diminishing Emily's voice, the reader risks projecting their own points of view or their own time period onto the story. That's not invalid, but it's heavily affected perception of this novel. So, J. Hillis Miller, who is one of the pioneers of literary deconstruction, which is concerned with connecting text with its associated meaning, wrote an essay called Wuthering Heights, Repetition in the Uncanny, which, amongst other topics, critiques the idea that you can figure out Wuthering Heights. In it, he says, each critique on Wuthering Heights brings something to light, even though it covers something up in the act of doing so. He goes on to argue that the error lies in the assumption that the meaning is going to be single, unified, and logically coherent. This goes for both the modern-day literary critic as well as Charlotte Bronte. Charlotte's prefaces, with their multiple interpretations, establish a program for all the hundreds of essays and books on Wuthering Heights which were to follow. Returning again to the Nellie problem, one of the logical fallacies of Charlotte's preface lies in Nellie's narration. Nellie has minimal connection to the moors compared to Catherine and Heathcliff. The raw picture of nature that Charlotte argues is portrayed in the novel is in contrast with the partiality of Nellie. She is a servant of the same class, if not a slightly higher class than Heathcliff, a boy whose class was elevated by adoption and through whatever means he found his wealth. She grew up with the Earnshaws but had to mature much faster. Over time, we see her opinions of each character diminish as their more negative traits begin to dominate their personalities. That is the mind we see the story through. And while she may not always reflect Emily's opinion, it's wrong to say her voice and elements of her commentary aren't reflected through it. Okay. What I'm getting at is yes, the moors are a very important backdrop of the story and a valid lens to view it through. And yes, Nellie's narration is also impactful to the story and a valid lens to view it through. Both things can be true at once. Even as Miller puts it, the resulting meaning of the story is not logically coherent. Both things can be true at once. I regret getting my license. So when an adaptation removes something like Nellie's narration, you're removing an element of Emily Bronte's voice. Emily's words mean something. They aren't just her speaking through nature, and there's no singular lens this novel can be viewed through to capture everything. The Nellie problem is just the tip of the iceberg. The filmmaker trying to create a cohesive story changes Nellie's role because Nellie as a narrative device doesn't adapt well to the screen. If we expand this beyond Nellie, we begin to see how this problem snowballs because once she is removed, we now see things through the chosen lens of the filmmaker. Whether or not they capture the nuances and criticisms that Bronte is trying to convey depends on the lens they choose to view the film through, and I think that is why we end up with so many unsatisfactory adaptations. So from this, I don't think we can really judge an adaptation of Wuthering Heights on whether it captures the full spirit of the novel. Like Miller said, you can bring something to light, but it covers something up in the act of doing so. So maybe these adaptations should be judged on more singular elements. And I don't mean like, did they adapt the plot correctly? More so, how are they adapting the commentary and themes of the novel, even if it's not all of them? And it's not an easy thing to do, and plus, on top of all this, it has to be a good movie. So, did you really need me for that conclusion? If you're not here, then I'd just be talking to myself, so. Okay, see you next time. But I have more. What about analyzing the actual adaptations? Reflect on it some. I believe in you. And next week we're going to talk about upping your dosage. Close your eyes and take a deep breath. On your exhale, set your intention. Analyzing the many adaptations of Wuthering Heights. Oh, okay, that's new, but this is your practice. You can take a nap for the next half hour for all I care. Great. You see, in an essay written by Lynn Hare Sargent titled Sympathy for the Devil, The Problem with Heathcliff and Film Versions of Wuthering Heights, she says something about book adaptations that I particularly agree with. We should not judge a movie made from a book as a copy. Rather, we should evaluate whether the movie communicates something of the book's particular art. This quote summarizes my thoughts better than I could have, especially in relation to Wuthering Heights. I'm not a book purist because there are some elements that just don't translate well from book to screen, but of course, there's elements of a book that are important to leave in to properly communicate and express the spirit of it. This book just is not adaptable from a purist point of view, in my opinion. Again, mainly due to limitations caused by the Nelly problem. I think we can look at and praise what these adaptations do capture while also critiquing how they handle the things they don't/cannot. So, taking this into account, how have some of these adaptations stacked up? Even after 100 years, every adaptation garners similar complaints about capturing Bronte's intentions and characterization elements of the story. To me, while acknowledging the limitations of adaptations, these complaints boil down to three issues. Okay, you're gonna talk for the whole time. Number 1. They're telling a different story. Yes, it follows the plot, but they've made significant enough changes or left out important elements that just change the meaning. This isn't just the narrative structure is different. This is changing the theme. A lot of this comes from the creators just trying to tell a tragic love story rather than the complex story that Bronte wrote, which just doesn't do the novel justice. Number 2. Characterization. Most of the stories rightfully convey Heathcliff as the main character, but they then change the other characters to suit the narrative they're trying to follow with Heathcliff. There aren't any adaptations where I felt they've gotten Heathcliff totally wrong. The racial and class aspect certainly hasn't been nailed, but there's a lot of adaptations that ignore other characters' traits and how they fit into the narrative to further lift Heathcliff as this Byronic hero. This may not bug non-book readers, but for those who have read the book, it doesn't feel like a true adaptation. Additionally, sympathy for Heathcliff is better drawn early on by portraying his otherness in more regards, especially in race and class. Number 3. It's hard to watch. These characters suck. This is a story about the worst of us, and putting that to screen in its totality isn't always enjoyable. Reading something, especially something that is being received as a secondhand story with implicit biases, is very different than watching it unfiltered. At the end of the day, if you can't have sympathy for the characters, it's not an enjoyable experience. And of course, there are just really horrifying moments in the book that need to be put to the screen with intention. Balancing points 2 and 3 are tricky. I think in trying to make the characters more sympathetic, a lot of movies water down their actions. In return, that makes their stories less nuanced and sometimes changes the character entirely. I think at least 2 of the adaptations that I watch find balance in these issues, but I know opinions about the adaptations vary, and frankly, I kinda hate the story, so maybe my opinions aren't that valid, I don't know. This is your time to let out any negative energy, so by all means. Great. Let's take a look at some of these adaptations. Oh, that's cool, you brought reference material. The best known one is the 1939 adaptation directed by William Wyler and starring Laurence Olivier as Heathcliff and Mara Oberon as Catherine. It's considered a classic and it was nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars for good reason. It feels very classic Hollywood, but I think that doesn't quite fit the feeling of Wuthering Heights personally. The characters are very stiff and cold compared to how they're described in the books. It makes the moments of passion stand out more, and you can tell that this was a deliberate artistic choice, so I can respect that. I think the issues of this one fall into categories 1 and 2. This is a tragic love story. It's good and enjoyable to watch, but I think it misses the complexity of the book. It also cuts out the second half with the next generation, so you don't get the full depth of the characters. The main story just ends with Catherine dying in Heathcliff's arms before cutting back to Nellie talking to Lockwood. I was left wondering, wait, that's it? Oh, okay, now he's chasing her on the moors. He's dead, cool. Catherine is also pretty hollowed out in this one. This adaptation focuses on her ego, but often calls that ego vanity instead. Not wrong, just not the full picture. She states her desire for a higher class life early on, which doesn't quite match the younger Catherine we're shown in the book. For the pieces of her characterization that don't quite match what they want to say, there's some elements of telling rather than showing. They say she's wild, but we don't really see that in her. I think this characterization of Kathy just serves the tragic aspect of the story they wanted to tell. Here's a woman whose fatal flaw was vanity, and who denied herself and her love a chance at true happiness. And don't you feel bad for Heathcliff? This is one of the few adaptations to include Lockwood, but it does not solve the Nellie problem. Lockwood serves a similar storytelling purpose to that of the book, as the audience can see the story through him, but Nellie isn't really telling the story. It's good, it's enjoyable, but it does feel like a hollow Wuthering Heights. This movie is a classic, so it does influence the adaptations that come after it. To some degree, you aren't just adapting Wuthering Heights, you're remaking a classic, which adds a weird layer of complexity to a filmmaker's decision making. But after watching too many goddamn adaptations in a row, I can tell you that they are very different from one another. I'd maybe do this in a child's pose. Oh, yeah. The 1970 version with Timothy Dalton as Heathcliff and Anna Cullen Marshall as Catherine understands that this isn't just a love story better than other adaptations, but the characters are not the ones from the book, and in my opinion, it isn't enjoyable. Everyone is a terrible person, even more so in the book sometimes, which is saying something. The Lintons are petulant and almost as bad as the Earnshaws.
Well, play it yourself then, which must be very difficult if you're tone deaf.
This one doesn't set up Catherine and Heathcliff's love very well either, plus he's physically and sexually abusive to her, which deviates from the book quite a lot. And like most versions, this one doesn't adapt the second half of the book, but rather than ending when Catherine dies, it invents an ending where Henley kills Heathcliff. This one also runs into the Nellie problem in a fascinating way. In this one, they actually get her age right because most age her up, but I guess because she's young like the others, she has to be as angry and horny as everyone else is. She basically acts like the people who are in a higher class than her, completely ignoring any possible class commentary. Even worse, they invent yet another narrative where she's in love with Henley. This adaptation does explore some of the sexual themes of the book, but not very well. A lot of the novelty with Catherine is that her nature is not what society has defined for her. She's much more dominant than the ideal woman of the time. Therefore, you'd want her energy, sexual or otherwise, to match Heathcliff. It doesn't. This is a bodice ripper. Honestly, this adaptation can best be described as a dick measuring contest between all the men to see who can get the most women. Okay, I don't know you well enough for that comment, but that's fine. Jumping to something completely different, there's also a Lifetime movie adaptation called Wuthering Heights set in a modern-day Malibu high school. Now, you may think these are the ingredients for a bad Wuthering Heights adaptation, but you would only be mostly correct. This movie makes a lot of mistakes. 1. Malibu. Interesting choice to represent the moors of northern England. 2. Kathy is the main character. It can be done, I just wouldn't have. This being told from Heathcliff's, or in this case Heath's point of view, would have been way more interesting. What this adaptation surprisingly gets right is that it characterizes Heathcliff as an other in regard to class and translates this to a more modern setting. He's Hispanic and his mother used to work for Kathy's family. It nails the class separation better than most adaptations I've seen, if I'm being honest. Kathy and Heath's relationship is also possessive and toxic rather than romantic. You know, I do think Heathcliff would petulantly try to nail a kickflip outside of Catherine's Bible studies if given a skateboard in the book. I will say, It's way more of a teen drama than a gothic romance, and it knows this,
Where's Twilight?
but I have to give them points for the two not just being the ill-fated star-crossed lovers that adaptations like to make them out to be. It's not a great movie, but it's not a bad time. It's a good one to laugh at with your friends, but don't take it too seriously. Okay. You okay? Yeah. The most credited adaptation for actually addressing the racial class issue around Heathcliff is the 2011 version directed by Andrea Arnold and starring James Howson as Heathcliff and Kayla Scodelario as Catherine. So, I have to be honest here. I could not get through this one. I I tried, I really did, but I was so Wuthering Heights out by the time I got to this one, and it's by far the most brutal to watch. It felt heavily inspired by Dogma 95, which is a Dutch filmmaking movement with very strict rules regarding how a film should be created. Handheld camera, no music, just the actors telling a story. Based on the full set of rules, it very much is not a Dogma 95 film, but you get the picture. There's very little dialogue on top of there being no music, and it chooses to focus on the more brutal parts of the story. For some, this is what makes this adaptation truer to the essence of the book, and that's great and all, but it's just not enjoyable to watch. And to that point, I don't think it captures the essence all that well either. The dialogue is a very important part of the story, and we miss a lot by cutting out what the characters say. I always try to respect an artistic vision, and I think this was bold and well thought out. It brought something to the landscape of Wuthering Heights adaptations that hadn't been done before. It's just not a movie I want to watch. On to the ones that I find to be the best adaptations. The first is a 1992 version with Ralph Fiennes playing Heathcliff, and this one hits the right notes. It was one of the first to adapt the stories of both generations, which better captures the complexities of the book. The however here is that the movie is only an hour and 45 minutes long, so the story never has room to breathe. I can see this adaptation confusing someone who hasn't read the book because of how quickly it moves between scenes. I'd say the biggest crime in this is that it doesn't show much of Kathy and Heathcliff growing up together, so we miss out on how deep their connection is, and this makes their passionate feelings seem out of place. Where I give this adaptation the most points is in its characterization. This is the first one I've seen capture Heathcliff's cruelty accurately. Yes, he's terrible in the other ones, but they didn't need to invent plot points in this. Ralph Fiennes does a good job of bringing the role to life, and they actually pull out some of the more gnarly lines from the book.
I found a lapwing's nest at Penistone Crag when you were away. But you didn't come. So I put a wire mesh over the nest, and all the little ones died when they hatched.
I also think this one has the most accurate Isabella, a character that often gets changed to make Heathcliff seem less terrible. We often see an Isabella who is just as guilty because she more actively pursues Heathcliff rather than him taking advantage of her naivety and kind nature. This is very victim-blamey, but gives Heathcliff more plausible deniability in marrying Isabella because, well, she basically asked for it, when really Heathcliff was doing all he could to hurt Catherine by hurting Isabella. The trade-off? It's hard to watch. Heathcliff is just terrible. He's terrible in the book, but based on how he's essentially pitied by Nellie towards the end and the time the book takes at the beginning to establish him as more sympathetic, we come out feeling bad for him in some way. In this one, there's no secondary narration to hide behind, and the beginning was rushed. Once again, bringing up the Nellie problem, Nellie is not narrating. Emily Bronte is. We see her, played by Sinead O'Connor, fun fact, walk into an abandoned building and start writing the story.
Something whispered to my mind, and I began to write.
As you can see, this is very much viewing it through the lens of the Moors made me do it, as laid out in Charlotte Bronte's preface. As a result, Heathcliff's actions are shown to us as clear as day, and there's nothing to make them more palatable. The adaptation is the truest to the story, but it misses key elements that keep it from being a definitive adaptation, in my opinion. The other adaptation I like is the 2009 version with Tom Hardy as Heathcliff and Charlotte Riley as Catherine. It's not without its flaws, but I think this one is the only one that stays true to the characters in the story while also being enjoyable. Honestly, this one's my favorite. Wait, was that Rick Grimes? Yeah, I mean, man's got range. This was a two-part TV miniseries, but it's 2 hours and 22 minutes, so basically a modern movie runtime. This length also gives more room to flesh out the plot, and while we don't get Mr. Lockwood in this adaptation, we do get both generations. The story nails the characters, in my opinion. This is the only version where I simultaneously hated and felt bad for everyone, including Edgar. Hell, and Henley. My boy just wanted his fiddle.
I chose a fiddle, but when he returned, he did not bring us what we had asked for.
Catherine and Heathcliff feel like they're actually in love at the beginning, and I think this one is the most convincing portrayal of how their passions were warped into hatred and madness. Due in part to the chemistry between Tom Hardy and Charlotte Riley, the two eventually started dating after this, and they're now married, so, that tracks. Tom Hardy absolutely nails the role of Heathcliff. There are moments when I actually teared up watching this, and this was after watching 5 other adaptations and rereading the book. The writing does him justice as well. There are a few changes to the placements of key quotes from the book, and I actually like what they did. In the book, Heathcliff says the famous "drive me mad" quote when talking to Nellie on the moors after finding out Catherine had died. In this adaptation, he says it to Catherine's body when visiting her corpse.
Be with me always. Take any form and drive me mad, but don't leave me.
Now, there's significance to him saying this on the moors, given that Catherine is thematically connected to that landscape, but the way he delivers this line to her is a better visual translation, in my opinion. Hardy delivers this line with both rage and sorrow, and I think Catherine being there physically gives him more to latch onto in performing this line. That's all to say, I actually felt bad for him for once. Yeah, he really did it. Where I think people can fairly fight me on is issue number 1. They're telling a different story. This adaptation adds a fair amount to the story, and there are scenes which just don't exist in the book, which is fine, but for some it may be a detractor. Again, I'm not a book purist as long as the adaptation captures the spirit of the story. I made fun of the 1970 version for adding scenes, but I don't think those additions are true to the spirit of the book. This version kind of feels like someone read Wuthering Heights and really understood the overall themes and messages of the story, but then tried to write it from memory. Like, Heathcliff commits terrible acts of cruelty in this adaptation, but they aren't always the same ones from the book. This version also has the best Nellie, but suffers from a different Nellie problem. She is so close to the original Nellie in terms of how her character is portrayed, but she's not the narrator. There's no Mr. Lockwood in this version, and they don't even throw in her narrations. So she is the most accurate portrayal, but it almost feels useless. When you look at the story as essentially gossip between neighbors, Nellie is in fact a bit of a nosy Nellie. She's very intertwined in this family drama for someone who is a servant, and yes, servants know everything, but she is an active participant in the drama, and this adaptation shows that. There was a scene where we see Nellie just sort of sitting there, cleaning this painting, and I thought, wow, I love how she's just sitting here for the tea, and then Catherine acknowledges that.
What are you doing there, Nellie?
My what, miss?
Take yourself and your dusters off.
As a reader, this was great, but to a non-reader, she kind of just looks like a nosy servant and not our complex subjective narrator. Having her be the narrator would have made moments like this more purposeful, but it would limit the scope of the story they told, so I get it. Quick bias alert, Nellie also has a few moments like this in the 1970 version, but it's not the same. And I don't like her, this is not my Nellie. Moving on, there's also of course the racial class aspect. I think of all the adaptations, save for the 2011 version, this one is able to convincingly portray Heathcliff's class otherness, in part due to some additions at the beginning of the story. But I think if the actor was a different race, they wouldn't have had to do as much convincing. All in all, this is a solid adaptation with some lost potential, but I do really like it. So looking at all these adaptations, I think it's safe to say there's still room for more interpretations of the text. I don't know how close they'll come to satisfying the masses, but their artistic value shouldn't be overlooked. These adaptations only reinforce the complexities of the original novel. This brings us to Emerald Fennell's adaptation. And this is the final resting pose, so we're gonna have to end here. Plus, I don't think it can provide the level of spiritual guidance that this matter necessitates. Oh, yeah, that's fair, sorry. Forgive me, I don't quite know how this works. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. My last confession was It wasn't. Please continue. Well, I started where anyone trying to be reasonable starts, right? Don't hold an opinion on a movie that's not out yet. Assuming makes an ass out of you and me, and I don't want to make an ass out of God, so. I'm not God, that's not how this works. Why are you here? But how can you hold an opinion after seeing that trailer? And now, especially after watching the movie itself. Ultimately, I think I'm just conflicted. Wait, you're confessing about a movie? What movie? Oh, the new Wuthering Heights? Oh, yeah, no, that's inherently sinful. Go on. Before even going into it, I was sifting through other people's opinions on top of my own. There have been countless theories about this movie, like, oh, maybe they're gonna switch who plays Linton and Heathcliff. Oh, maybe this is like a self-insert thing and it's not really Wuthering Heights. And oh, look, the title's in quotation marks, so it's not really going to be Wuthering Heights. A lot of them come back to, this can't actually be Wuthering Heights, right? Not to mention, the press tour has been weird. Like, I'm not even going to get into that because I'm already tired of this codependency narrative and marketing. Okay, you're not Cynthia and Ariana, you're not Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper, you're embarrassing yourself. And so were they. But love it or hate it, people eat that shit up and it puts butts in seats. Including my butt. And I have thoughts. Did you come here right after seeing the movie? Listen, okay, I needed Jesus. Fair enough. Firstly, though, I want to go into how I thought going into the movie because I know people had doubts. I wanted to keep an open mind because this movie will get a fair amount of criticism based on the current media landscape alone. Then you throw in the fact that they're adapting a beloved literary classic and Fennell's got her work cut out for her. Plus, I've seen my fair share of Wuthering Heights adaptations and I can say it's not easy to adapt. Please see the last half hour. But I do think she understands this based on how she talks about the book. She even commented on the quotations in the title.
The thing for me is that you can't adapt a book as dense and complicated and difficult as this book.
This is a very stylized version of Wuthering Heights, and as I stated, I tried to respect an artistic vision. But I do think an artistic vision has to communicate something about the book. So, did it? I did find it different. All of the adaptations of this movie that I've watched have had something to say. This adaptation is no different, and even though it may not follow what people imagine as Emily Bronte's artistic vision, I don't think that invalidates it. What I wanted most for this adaptation is for it to explore aspects of the novel that other adaptations haven't touched on, even if it covers something up in the act of doing so. I think there's some aspects that Fennell very much had the potential to nail that people don't give her credit for. Of course I rewatched Saltburn, which if you haven't seen it is about— Yeah, no, I've seen it. Oh. Well, as you know, Emerald Fennell made that too. I was initially conflicted about that movie as well. In fact, I screamed out loud when my friends and I watched that grave scene because I gotta say, that one should have made the 10 Commandments as well. Thou shalt not do that to a grave. But on rewatch, since nothing could surprise me this time, I actually liked it a lot more. Originally, I had thought it was style over substance, but I really enjoyed it this time around. Honestly, though, that's a confession for another time. Please don't. When that grave scene came up again, I was now watching it through that Wuthering Heights lens. It made me realize, hey, that's a lot like that scene in Wuthering Heights where our boy Heathcliff digs up Catherine's grave. And upon further reading, yeah, that is directly what inspired her. And much like the visceral reaction I had to watching a man defile a grave, it hit me. Emerald Fennell has already made a Wuthering Heights adaptation. Saltburn. Kind of. Saltburn is about— My child, I've already seen it. Okay, this is my confession, let me cook. Saltburn is about a young man named Ollie who meets the attractive, charming, and rich Felix. He's invited to spend the summer at Felix's family home, Saltburn. We see how his class makes him an other in this household. He's constantly judged, the family is condescending, and he's humiliated over and over again. But eventually he enacts some methodical revenge against them. He's both a Byronic hero and a gothic monster, much like Heathcliff. In fact, I'd argue his motivations are incredibly similar to Heathcliff's. Ollie holds this twisted desire and obsession with Felix, a twisted desire that fuels simultaneous love and hatred. The humiliation inflicted on him, which reminds him of and enforces his otherness, the generational revenge, and class usurpation. So much of Saltburn feels like Wuthering Heights, in spirit at least. Knowing Fennell's love of Wuthering Heights and seeing that, or maybe searching for that to be honest, reflecting in Saltburn definitely gave me higher hopes for adaptation. I think you can take Promising Young Woman into account here too. Cassie, Carey Mulligan's character in that movie, is a great exploration of grief, the devastating anger and sadness it causes, and how people can get stuck in it while not being able to move on. What I'm saying is, going into it, I trusted Emerald Fennell to handle complex emotions and characters surrounding things like grief, rage, humiliation, class disparity, etc. Keyword here, trusted. There were, of course, some things I had my concerns about. Yeah, no, you should. The casting of all things honestly shocked me. How can someone cast a white man to play Heathcliff now? But it looks like more people are pissed about Margot Robbie playing Catherine? Are we so desensitized as a society that folks are angrier about a blonde Catherine? When explaining her rationale, she said that while filming Saltburn, she thought Jacob Elordi looked like the illustration of Heathcliff on the cover of Wuthering Heights she read as a kid. And I gotta say, I need receipts. I tried to find a cover with a Jacob Elordi-esque man, and they're all generic white smudges. Father, I know I cannot legally lie in confession. So I have to say, in that case, I honestly could have understood casting Barry Keoghan as Heathcliff. I would still be annoyed, but at least then I'd actually believe that excuse. How can you say that on the set of Saltburn, after watching Barry Keoghan give a borderline Byronic creepy-ass performance, that Jacob Elordi was the better Heathcliff? At least Keoghan is Irish. Oh my god, Father, am I a race apologist? Is that why you're here? No, I have more. Christ. I've seen two words pop up a couple of times in online discourse regarding this adaptation: Bridgertonification and Saltburnification. Bridgertonification of media, or the Bridgerton effect, because Bridgertonification is hard to say out loud, is a term used to describe period pieces that stylistically add anachronisms to tell a period story that fits more modern sensibilities, often with more inclusive casting. It is also associated with a specific aesthetic of cottagecore and pastels that are meant to romanticize the Regency or Victorian era. There are some who believe that Bridgerton has cheapened what a period piece can be because its success had influenced other period pieces to fit a similar aesthetic. I understand why this is brought up when discussing this new adaptation, given that 1. It is a period piece, 2. Anachronisms galore, and 3. Inclusive casting. Needless to say, there's nothing wrong with inclusive casting, but there's a difference between color-conscious casting and color-blind casting. You do have to take into account what story you want to tell, and in this case, the story you're adapting. I don't think this description fits Emerald Fennell's vision. The function of the changes that Bridgerton has inspired in other period pieces is to shape them to more modern storytelling, again by injecting more modern sensibilities and values. I don't know whose values these are. You could say the modern aspect is the over-sexualization, but I do think that is something you can turn into actual commentary related to the book, but I'll get to that later. I'm surprised you haven't mentioned the costumes. Have you seen the other adaptations? The hairstyles are crazy. Look at this Luke Skywalker looking ass. Besides, you're in medieval monk clothing. Do you really think I care about costume accuracy? Is that what these are? Okay, seriously though. I understand the desire for accurate costuming and period pieces. However, these costumes conveyed the story Fennell wanted to tell, in my opinion. In January, Jacqueline Duran, the movie's costume designer, did an interview with Vogue talking about the mood boards and inspiration for some of the costumes. One of the costumes they discussed was the dress Catherine wears on her wedding night that's been ringing a lot of alarm bells for period piece lovers and people with eyes. When talking about the design choices, Duran said, "One image Emerald showed me was this amazing 1950s picture of a woman wrapped in cellophane, like a gift with a bow around the middle. That was the starting point for this look, and we thought, how can we recreate this? It's about Kathy being a gift on her wedding night, making herself a gift." I think it's also important to note that Duran was previously a costume designer for movies like Little Women, Anna Karenina, and Pride and Prejudice, so she has experience with period pieces. So there is a vision here and not one we've really seen before. One thing that I found interesting that I very much believe is Fennell projecting some of her own experience onto this movie is the way it portrayed Thrushcross Grange versus Wuthering Heights. It captured the heaven versus hell themes very well, especially where the houses kind of cross over into the realm associated with the other. But to me, I think it also captured the difference between old money and new money, and that's a lot of what we're seeing in Kathy's costumes. This isn't explored in the book at all and is very much an addition to this adaptation. There is something to be said about respecting the time and setting this was written in, though. Returning to the casting, the choices really don't feel right. You lose a lot of the complexities of the narrative when you ignore the racial and class-related issues that Wuthering Heights explores. Also, I don't think anyone liked this comment that the casting director made when the casting was announced. It really seems at odds with Fennell's feelings on the novel as well. Overall, I do think the atmosphere made up for this for me. I thought the setting was captured very well, if not in a fantastical way. It felt very dreamlike. Maybe that made me dissociate at times, who knows? The other criticism, of course, is saltburnification, also sometimes referred to as the TikTokification of media. Basically, quote-unquote high cinema that includes shocking and disturbing scenes for the sake of online virality. Think A24 or adjacent films that are pretty and vaguely thought-provoking, but why are they ew? The common argument surrounding this topic is that it's nothing new. Shock value, outrage content, taboo horror, etc. have been aspects of media for decades. What makes this absurd phenomenon unique is it's broken out of that niche internet or B-movie realm into mainstream media. Additionally, there tends to be an aesthetic around this type of media. Basically, people believe that these scenes are put in to purposely feed into the TikTok algorithm and go viral. Like sound-biteable shock value. The bathtub scene, the vampire scene, the grave scene. I think there's a tendency to point to shocking moments in films like this now and blame Saltburn. I think some films took this notoriety approach after Saltburn came out because they saw how much that boosted it, but I think we can all agree shocking for the sake of being shocking is boring and uninspired. Of course, people were going to compare Wuthering Heights to Saltburn. On top of sharing a creator, we all watched the same trailer. That was bound to stir online debate. The movie is very sexually charged, at times to its own detriment. I mentioned before that the whole thing is dreamlike, and at times it dips into outright absurdism. There are parts where it just was hard not to laugh at what the hell is happening. I think there's a way to make sexual themes work for Wuthering Heights. One of the gripes I have with the 1970 Wuthering Heights adaptation is that it's a tame bodice ripper. The sexuality in this adaptation is all very male-dominant. There are a lot of instances that frame Catherine as submissive, sometimes in disturbing ways. But one of her defining characteristics is her dominant personality. As Nellie begins her narration, one of the first things we learn about Catherine is that she asked her father for a whip as a gift from his travels. She was only 6 years old. This is very telling of her personality and is an aspect that we don't often get in film adaptations. The heteronormative, dominant, submissive characterization of romantic relationships doesn't fit Catherine Heathcliff in Wuthering Heights. Remember, she is Heathcliff, so you have to ask yourself, who would be doing the bodice ripping? I think some take issue with the sexual interpretation of Wuthering Heights because this interpretation would come from the subtext over the actual text. In some ways, I do as well because I'm not a fan of the Freudian psychoanalysis school of media criticism this often falls into. Nonetheless, I don't think it's an invalid reading of the book because there is some very loud subtext that goes beyond the subconscious. This is a very passionate novel, and I think Gothic literature in general lends itself well to sexual themes. Again, with Nellie, she observes Catherine Heathcliff embracing and kissing at many points in the book, but she would not have seen them have sex. That does not mean they didn't, and I think whether they did is up for the reader to decide. So with Fennell's interpretation, I don't think overtly sexual content should make us immediately write it off. But for the actual film itself? Based on how Fennell spoke, this didn't seem like an unchecked bodice ripper, but the trailer was starting to make me think otherwise. And it definitely explores Cathy's sexual awakening, but the dynamic between her and Heathcliff is very different compared to other adaptations I've seen. Returning again to the present dress, based on the comment from Jacqueline Duran, Catherine is being presented as a present. They play the gilded cage angle with Thrushcosh Grange, and this extends to the sexual themes as well. Catherine is more submissive / not there with Edgar, and this is used as juxtaposition to Catherine's true nature and how she is with Heathcliff, i.e. heavenly prison versus hellish freedom. Beyond these criticisms, there were certainly other things I was worried about going into this movie. Reports from the first screen test were definitely concerning. Audience reactions were mixed, which is fitting, but really the attention grabber was that opening scene, where a man being executed, finished on the crowd, and a nun fondles his corpse. And you still went to see this? I know, it just begs the question. Why are there nuns in 18th century England? Like, I know there was some in hiding, but fondling a corpse isn't exactly hiding, you know? Why aren't my period lovers up in arms about this? I know I certainly was. Reading this, I knew there was no way in hell that they would actually open the final release of a movie with this. This was just meant as an attention grabber to get eyes on the film early. And I was right. It opens similarly, a man is being hanged, and it's what I'd call a depraved scene, but not this terrible. I also know many people have taken issue with this tagline, because as everyone jumps to, it's not a love story, it's a story of revenge. You're missing the point. As I've discussed though, isn't this also an oversimplification of the story as much as you think this statement is? A lot of people take interest in the story as a character study on why people do things. Why do people hurt those they care about most? Framing it as either love or revenge alone doesn't do justice to the nature of the characters Bronte wrote, but I do understand why people gravitate towards one or the other when describing this book. Do you choose to focus on the hurt or the care more in that sentence?
People are difficult. I'll drink to that.
I really think this is what Fennell wanted to focus on here, and for those who still don't buy this, the soundtrack absolutely saves this movie. I know people were skeptical about Brat Summer Wuthering Heights, but it worked. It's not Brat Summer, I promise. The soundtrack is so tense at times it feels like a horror movie. Just absolutely sinister moments.
Wait, how does it stack up against the 3 problems you say adaptations fall into? How do you... God sees everything. Okay.
So I'll say it. This is not the same story. Like, at all. For one, I'd say Catherine is the main character, which is a rare take. I didn't hate it because I thought the focus was interesting. The sex sometimes takes away from the overall story, which is frustrating when I think this could have made a good exploration of Catherine's character. It does understand how important Kathy and Heathcliff's childhood is in establishing their connection, so their connection isn't just sex. At least that's what they want you to think. How well they convince me they loved each other is still up for debate. She doesn't really explore the complex emotions of the characters, especially Heathcliff. It's all very Catherine focused. Based on her other films, this was a surprise to me. This is definitely an assumption, but I'm wondering if she just wanted to go a different route because she had already explored, I'll call it the subset of Heathcliff's emotions in Saltburn. Again, an assumption, but overall I was definitely disappointed by this aspect. Going back to the old versus new money take, if I was to really describe this movie, it felt less like Wuthering Heights at times and more like they shot The Great Gatsby as a horror movie. The way Heathcliff pines after Catherine is very much like Gatsby. Like, she is his green light kind of thing. Catherine is a lot like Daisy at times too, with how silly she is and how that sometimes masks depression. It's just a much more gothic, intense Great Gatsby. As for characterization, well, Heathcliff isn't the main character, so the other characters aren't really changed to prop him up. Fennell still portrays the ugly in all of these characters. Like, Heathcliff is downright terrible, just not in the same way he is in the book. Edgar is fascinating, he's just a man. He reacts in the way that really anyone would in that situation, so I commend the writing for not making him unlikable for the sake of propping up the love story. As for Isabella... Jesus. Okay, I was really digging how weird she was at first. She was so weird and kind, and I thought it'd be easy to feel bad for her once she was with Heathcliff. But nope. I mean, I still felt bad for her, but what did they do to my girl? Like, get off the floor, someone give her a hug. So, in order to degrade Isabella like Catherine claims marrying Heathcliff would have degraded her, he basically makes her act like a dog and some kinky shit.
I did not like that. In the book, Heathcliff does hang Isabella's dog. Part of me is thinking Fennell may have misremembered the scene, and this is what we ended up with.
As for the other characters, well, they wrote out Henley and combined his character with their father. Very odd choice. Also, Joseph and Zillah are together, I don't know why.
Wait, what about the Nellie problem?
Yeah, that wasn't Nellie. They changed her role completely. She was an antagonist to Kathy. It wasn't completely terrible because it worked for this story, and she wasn't a passive character. I did find her resentment of Kathy to be really interesting, and the biggest reason I didn't hate it was because it was still in the realm of possibility. Nellie is telling us the story, and she could have lied. She could have been a complete bitch the whole time for all we know. But yeah, no, that's not Nellie.
Overall, I have to confess, I didn't hate it. It's a new take, and I'm happy to explore the sexual subtext in a new way. At the end, a lot of people in the theater were crying, and I can't lie, Jacob Elordi made me tear up a bit too. Charlie XCX deserves every penny she gets off of this album because her music truly saved the movie. Overall, I'd say it's a 6.5 out of 10. Go see it if you want something weird, but it is truly Wuthering Heights. Also, I think I'm attracted to bread now. So that was a lot. As I mentioned, there's still a lot of discourse around Emerald Fennell's adaptation, and to be honest, I haven't really liked how people have talked about this movie. Without invalidating anyone's feelings, it's really devolved into outrage farming. I've gotten so many videos in my feed about this adaptation since I started researching Wuthering Heights, and I gotta say, it's an oversaturated outrage market. I'm sure this is exactly what the marketing team wanted because it will drive up sales. So rather than completely feed into that, for this video, I wanted to explore something a bit different, i.e. the actual challenges that go into adapting Wuthering Heights. I think it's really easy to look at the mental breakdown that is this video and conclude that if there's no way to make a satisfying adaptation and it's too complicated, then why don't you leave Wuthering Heights alone? But that's really not the impression I want to leave you with. Even adaptations that don't nail it still have value. It's like any written criticism of the novel. When you discuss one thing, you risk covering up another. That doesn't mean it's invalid because you won't find the true meaning of the book. When a novel means something to us as much as this novel means to many people, we become very protective of it. And believe me, I understand this wholeheartedly. If you love this book, why would you take my opinion seriously as someone who admittedly hates the novel? I watched a lot of adaptations for this video, and I somehow came away liking this novel more than I originally did. There was a moment when watching the 2026 adaptation where I started to get a bit mad at the changes and I realized, oh shit, I like this novel a lot now. The 2009 adaptation really changed my opinion on the book overall. Tom Hardy's performance specifically was very moving, but overall I think it captured something about the characters that I hadn't truly appreciated before. Because, like essays written by a critic, an adaptation can open up views of a novel you haven't seen before. It also makes the novel more accessible to people. Wuthering Heights is a very difficult book to read. Its subject matter is complex, it's hard to parse at times, and the subject matter is brutal. Look at this. I have already read this book, and this was still an effort to get through. If an adaptation helps you better understand or appreciate a novel, I don't think that makes your experience any less valid than a novel purist. But with inaccurate adaptations comes the fear that people come away with the wrong impression of the novel. While it's not my favorite, I do think Fennell's adaptation captures something about the novel that other adaptations haven't yet. There's a weird amount of pearl clutching about the idea that younger generations will come away with this macho labubu impression of the novel, and I can tell you, based off the reactions of the people in the theater, I don't think this is what non-book readers will take away. As weird as this novel was sometimes, so many people around me were straight up sobbing by the end. Shout out to the girl next to me who not so quietly poured herself a glass of wine between sobs. You are all of us. All in all, I hope you come away with a new appreciation for literary adaptation. It's not easy, and especially for Wuthering Heights. Please let me know all your opinions about Wuthering Heights in the comments. One of my favorite things about this novel is how people engage with it. No one comes away from this novel without an opinion on it. Also, let me know what your favorite adaptation is, especially if it's the 1970 version. Believe it or not, I don't like disliking things, and I do want to know why so many people like this adaptation. I don't claim to have full authority on what people will enjoy, so I totally understand if you don't agree with some of my assessments. I also did not give my full breadth of opinions on some of these movies because I could have made a 30-minute video about each of them. Speaking of, this video was too long for me to start sharing the fun facts that I learned about these adaptations, so to satiate that, please share some of your favorite fun facts about the adaptations in the comments. Most of the adaptations are free online, so I highly suggest checking them out, especially the 1939 one. I really enjoyed watching it, and it's free on YouTube. The Lifetime movie was not free. I regret buying it. Thanks for sticking around. This video took months to make, and it really was a labor of love and a bit of hate, too. Have a happy Valentine's Day or Friday the 13th, whichever holiday you choose to celebrate, and I'll see you next time. Cheers. Hey guys, it's Credits Katie. Thank you again for watching this far. It truly does mean a lot. I have spent the last 36 hours trying to get the last half hour of this video done after seeing the movie, and I gotta say, it has actually been very rewarding, so I hope you liked this video as much as I enjoyed making it. If you want to see more unhinged content like this, feel free to subscribe. Or don't, I'm not your mom. I am currently recording this at 1 in the morning, and after this, I am going to eat some cold pizza, because my microwave is broken, and that is my only option.
Happy February, and I hope you're getting through those last bits of winter because that stupid groundhog saw his shadow.
Is this a cardboard box? We're in the middle of a move.